I own your land, so I own you, Mountain Man declared to the obese girl. She wept. I own your land, so I own you. The words cracked through the dusty spring air like a whip. Rosalind Whitmore flinched as if he'd struck her, fingers clutching the frayed edge of her apron until her knuckles went white. The men gathered outside the Pine Ridge courthouse went quiet for half a second. Then the snickers started. Guess that's what happens when a fat girl can't pay her bills, someone muttered. Rosa tried to stand taller, but all she felt was exposed. Too big, too noticeable, too easy a target. She'd braided her reddish-brown hair neatly, worn her cleanest brown dress, even polished her worn boots. It didn't matter. Nothing ever hid the roundness of her belly, the curve of her hips, the soft fullness of her arms. In the eyes of the town, she was not a grieving granddaughter fighting to keep her home. She was a joke. On the courthouse steps, the banker folded the deed with a satisfied smile. Property known as the Whitmore Farm, 200 acres with house and outbuildings, sold to Mr. Nathaniel Blackwood. The name rolled over the crowd like a low rumble. Nathaniel Nate Blackwood, rancher, mountain man, land baron. People said he owned half the valley and didn't smile for anybody. They said he lived alone in a cabin big enough for a family, but kept it empty as a tomb. They also said no one crossed him and came out ahead. Rosa had never spoken to him. She'd only seen him from a distance, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, beard neatly trimmed instead of wild like most mountain men, eyes like deep, unreadable earth. He always rode alone. He always left quickly. Now he stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, hat low over his brow, leather coat catching the light. The deed disappeared into his inner pocket. When he looked up at her, the crowd seemed to melt away. "Miss Whitmore," the banker said briskly, "as of this moment, you no longer own the house or land. Mr. Blackwood does. You'll need to vacate within the week." Within the week. As if she had anywhere else to go. Rosa's throat burned. "My grandfather built that house with his own hands," she whispered. "I was raised there. I've paid every interest note on time since he died. You said—" "I said if you could pay the full debt by today, we'd talk," the banker cut in, impatience sharpening his tone. "You couldn't. Mr. Blackwood could. That's the end of it." Laughter rippled through the bystanders. "Should have eaten less and saved more, Rosie," someone called. Heat flared in her cheeks, tears pricking her eyes. She forced herself not to cry, not in front of them, not while they stared at her like she was some spectacle at a traveling show. Then he spoke. Nathaniel Blackwood stepped closer, his shadow falling across her shoes. Up close, he was even larger than he'd seemed from afar, broad as a barn door, scar lines fading into his beard, eyes a dark, steady brown that missed nothing. He studied her for a heartbeat, the redness around her eyes, the dirt on her hem from working fields that were no longer hers, the way she bit the inside of her cheek to keep from breaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough, carrying easily over the crowd. "Your land is mine now," he said, "and until you find somewhere else to go, that means you answer to me. I own your land, so I own you." The words punched through her chest. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. The crowd roared with fresh laughter, delighted by the cruelty they thought they'd heard. But his eyes didn't match the words. There was something else in them, something like regret or warning. Before we find out what Rosa says to him, tell me in the comments, Where in the world are you listening from? And if you were in her place, would you walk away from the only home you've ever known, or swallow your pride and face the mountain man who just claimed to own you? For a heartbeat, after Nathaniel spoke, Rosa forgot how to breathe. I own your land, so I own you. There it was again, the sentence that stripped her of every last shred of dignity in front of people who already thought she had none. The words landed exactly how the crowd wanted them to, like a brand seared across her skin. Property, not person. Sounds fair to me, someone called. Big man buys big farm, gets the big girl thrown in. More laughter. Rosa's vision blurred. She could feel every cruel glance, every amused smirk, every assessing look that slid over her body like greasy hands. Her size had always been the first thing people saw, a round silhouette in a world that worshipped sharp angles and slim waists. Maybe he'll need a draft horse, another man snorted. That girl's half the size of one. Rosa swallowed hard. She'd heard worse. She'd heard it from strangers and neighbors and from her own reflection on sleepless nights. But hearing it now, on the day she lost her home, in front of the man who held her future in his calloused hands, it felt different. It felt like being ripped open. The banker looked mildly uncomfortable, but not enough to intervene. He snapped his ledger shut. Everything's settled, Miss Whitmore. You got 7 days. After that, if you haven't cleared out, the sheriff will see to it. 7 days to pack a lifetime. 7 days to find somewhere to go when she had no family, no savings, no prospects. Nathaniel Blackwood still hadn't looked away from her. His face was unreadable, carved from the same rugged stone as the ridges behind town. He shifted his weight, the leather of his coat creaking, then said in that same gravel-deep voice, "We're not done talking, Miss Whitmore." Her stomach dropped. He took a step closer, close enough that she had to tip her head back to meet his gaze. Up close, his eyes weren't just brown. They were layered, like rich soil, dark, dense, with something buried deep. Flecks of gold caught the light. There were lines at the corners that didn't come from laughter. "Walk with me," he said. Not a request, not quite an order either. She almost said no. Pride rose in her like a last futile wave. But pride wouldn't put a roof over her head. Pride wouldn't change the ink already dry on the deed. So she nodded once and followed him down the courthouse steps. They reached the hitching rail where his black gelding waited. The sounds of the crowd faded a bit, though she could still feel their stares prickling the back of her neck. Nathaniel stopped, propped one boot on the lower rail, and turned toward her. "What I said back there," he began, voice flat, "it served its purpose." "Humiliating me?" she snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness. A muscle jumped along his jaw, keeping every man in that yard from thinking he could lay a hand on you while the ink was still wet. Rosa blinked, thrown. What? They saw a woman with no land, no money, no protection, he said. Men like that start calculating. A spare room, a bargain housekeeper, a body they think they can buy cheap. His eyes hardened. I needed them to believe you were already claimed, under my authority, off limits. Heat flooded her face, anger, shame, and a flicker of something that felt dangerously like relief. You could have chosen different words. I chose words they'd understand, he said simply. They don't respect kindness. Rosa bit the inside of her cheek, fighting back fresh tears. So that's what I am to you? A boundary marker? His gaze flicked over her, not in the hungry way of the men on the steps, but in a measuring, thoughtful way. "You're the woman attached to a piece of land I just bought," he said. "That makes you my responsibility until you're on your feet." "Your responsibility," she echoed, the phrase tasting like ash. "You make it sound like I'm another fence to mend." He huffed out a breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Fences don't look back at you like that." "Like what?" "Like they'd rather walk into a blizzard than accept help," he murmured. Silence settled between them. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, blowing it across her damp cheek. Nathaniel watched her carefully, as if choosing his words with the same precision he used to sight a rifle. "What are your plans?" he asked. She barked a humorless laugh. "Plans?" "Yes, my plans," she said steadily, "were to keep working my grandfather's land until it could pay off the banknote. Then he died, and I tried to do it alone. I planted, harvested, sold every egg, every jar of preserves, every bolt of cloth I could sew. It wasn't enough." Her voice cracked. "So now my plan is to pack up 70 years of Whitmore history into a wagon I don't own and, I don't know, find a boarding house that will take a woman who eats too much and earns too little?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and ugly. Shame flooded her. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. "Who told you that?" "Told me what?" "That you eat too much and earn too little." She almost said everyone. Instead, she lifted her chin. "You don't need to concern yourself with that, Mr. Blackwood. You have the land you wanted. Congratulations! I'll be out of your way." She turned to go. His hand closed around her wrist, not hard, but firm enough to hold. Calloused fingers, warm against her skin. "You're not listening," he said quietly. "Listening to what?" "To the part where I said you're my responsibility now." Her heart hammered painfully. "I am not your anything." His eyes darkened, but his voice stayed calm. "You can either walk out of this town with no money, no wagon, and no roof waiting on the other end, or you can come work for me on the very land you were trying to save." She froze. "Work for you?" "At my ranch," he said. "The Whitmore place will be folded into my grazing land, but the house is still standing. I also have a main cabin 15 miles west. Big place. Too big for one man. I need someone I can trust to run my household. Cooking, cleaning, managing supplies, keeping the books when I'm on the range." His gaze flicked to her chapped hands, her sturdy stance. "You've clearly been doing all of that already." Her heart squeezed. "You'd hire me?" "I don't hire people I think are useless," he said bluntly. "I hire people who get up before dawn and keep their land alive longer than any banker thought possible." The compliment hit harder than the cruelty had. It was too much, too kind, too dangerous. "I'd be living under your roof," she said slowly. "Yes, people would talk." "They already do," he replied. "Let them talk about the woman who took a job and kept her spine straight instead of the one who disappeared after losing everything." She swallowed. "And if I say no?" He let go of her wrist. "Then you walk out of here alone, and whatever happens after that is on you, not me." The choice lay before her like a fork in a rocky trail. Pride and hardship on one side, security and humiliation on the other. Work for the man who owned her land. Sleep under the roof of the man who'd claimed in front of everyone to own her. Her chest ached. Her grandfather's weathered, lined face flashed in her mind, his hands guiding hers as a girl, pressing seeds into warm soil. His voice gentle and firm. "You do what you must to survive, Rosie girl. The land teaches that better than any preacher." She lifted her head, meeting Nathaniel's gaze head-on. "If I agree," she said quietly, "I'm agreeing to work, not to be owned." Something in his expression shifted, just a flicker, but she saw it. Respect. "You'll work," he said. "You'll be paid. You'll eat at my table and sleep in a room with a door that only you decide who walks through it. I don't take what isn't freely offered, Miss Whitmore, not land, not labor, not anything else." Her cheeks burned. "Think carefully," he added. "Once we ride out of this town together, your life changes. You'll be under the protection of my name, and men like the ones laughing up there will think twice before spitting it out." She looked back toward the courthouse. The men who'd mocked her were already drifting away, their amusement spent. To them, she was yesterday's entertainment, nothing more. She turned back to Nathaniel Blackwood, the mountain man who now held the deed to her past and perhaps the key to her future. "I'll come," she whispered. "I'll work for you." His shoulders eased just a fraction. He nodded once. "Then pack what you can't bear to leave. We ride at first light." As she walked away, her heart twisted. She had not just lost her land. She had stepped into a life bound to the man who owned it. And whether that would save her or break her, she had no way of knowing. The sun had barely crested the rim of the valley when Rosa climbed into Nathaniel Blackwood's wagon the next morning. A rolled quilt lay over her lap. Beside her, a single trunk held everything she owned. The rest of her life, her grandfather's tools, the kitchen he built by hand, the orchard he planted, was now under someone else's brand. Nathaniel checked the harness one more time before climbing onto the bench beside her. He didn't look at her, not directly. He only flicked the reins and guided the horses west toward the mountains. The road narrowed quickly, banking along the rim of a pine forest that smelled of sap and cold earth. Neither of them spoke for the first hour. Rosa kept her hands clenched in her lap, afraid they might tremble. Nathaniel seemed carved from silence itself, jaw set, eyes vigilant, as if danger lurked behind every rising rock. She wondered if he always traveled like this, guarded, alone inside his thoughts, or if her presence somehow made him uneasy. When the wagon hit a rough rut, she jolted sideways. Without glancing away from the trail, Nathaniel shifted his arm just enough to steady her. The motion was instinctive, controlled, as if protecting others had once been second nature to him. "Road gets rougher from here," he said quietly. "I can manage," she replied. A faint sound escaped him, not quite a scoff, not quite approval. The trail pulled them deeper into the forest. Light thinned beneath towering pines, crisp air brushing Rosa's cheeks. She shivered lightly. Nathaniel noticed. He reached under the bench, pulled out a folded wool blanket, and handed it to her. "You'll need it," he said. She took it, fingers brushing the coarse wool. "Thank you." "Mountain nights drop 20 degrees after sundown," he added. "I don't want you freezing before you've worked a single day." It was meant to sound practical, but something softer threaded underneath. Hours passed. Rosa memorized the sway of the wagon, the rhythm of the horses' hooves, the sound of the wind shaping itself against the trees. She tried not to think about what it meant to live under another man's roof. She tried not to think about how yesterday she had been mocked, pitied, bargained over like cattle. The memory rose anyway. She stared straight ahead and said quietly, "What you said back there, at the courthouse, it hurt." Nathaniel didn't flinch, didn't offer excuses. "Yes." "You knew it would." "Yes." Rosa swallowed. Then why would you let them think you claimed me? Her voice wavered. Why let them think you wanted? Because if I hadn't, he cut in firmly, one of them would have. She turned to him. He finally met her eyes. They're not civilized men, Rosa, he said. Not when they smell weakness. A woman alone, grieving, desperate, large-bodied, they see opportunity, not character. His voice thickened with something sharp. They'd have hounded you the minute I turned my back. So instead you made it sound like you owned me. His gaze didn't budge. I made it sound like you were under protection. Rosa looked away. The wagon creaked over stones. It still hurt. I know, he said after a moment, and you can be angry at me for it. I won't stop you. It wasn't an apology, but it was something else, something real. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered over the peaks. The wind picked up, cool and sharp. Nathaniel guided the horses toward a small clearing by a stream. We'll camp here, he said. Rosa blinked. Camp? We're not reaching your ranch tonight? He shook his head. Too far, and I won't risk the mountain pass in the dark. He climbed down, tied the horses, then unloaded a canvas roll from the back. Rosa stepped down carefully, boots sinking into soft earth. Nathaniel crouched near the clearing, driving stakes into the ground with practiced movements. What can I do? Rosa asked. Gather firewood, he said. Then softer. Don't wander too far. There are cougars up here. Her pulse jumped. You're joking. I don't joke about predators. She found sticks, logs, fallen branches. Her grandfather had taught her well. When she returned, Nathaniel had a fire crackling, its heat cutting through the growing chill. He placed a tin pot over the flames, poured in water, and added dried vegetables and strips of salted venison. The simple smell of stew filled the clearing. Rosa knelt beside him, hugging her blanket around her shoulders. You didn't have to cook, she murmured. Nathaniel stirred the pot without looking away. You're not doing a day's work on an empty stomach. But you're the one who— Rosa! She shut her mouth. When the meal was ready, he handed her the first bowl. She blinked at him. You eat first? You need it more. She shouldn't have felt as moved as she did. Her throat tightened. She bent her head and ate. As the fire warmed their hands, darkness spread across the tree line. The sounds of the forest deepened, rustling branches, distant owls, the slow breath of wind over pine needles. Rosa wrapped her blanket tighter. Nathaniel stood. The tent's yours. She jerked her gaze up. Yours? Where will you sleep? He nodded toward the fire. Out here. In the cold? I'm used to it. The bluntness hit her chest with unexpected force. He was willing to sleep under the open sky so she wouldn't have to. But I can— No, he said quietly, final and unyielding. You sleep in the tent. You'll be warmer and safer. Rosa stared at him across the flickering firelight. He looked away first, as if the intensity of her gaze unsettled him. She rose slowly. Good night, Nathaniel. He hesitated, then tipped his hat slightly. Good night, Rosa. Inside the tent, Rosa curled beneath her quilt, listening to the soft crackle of fire, and just outside, the steady, watchful presence of the man who owned her land, but not her, not yet, and maybe not ever, unless he earned the right. Dawn spilled over the ridgeline in a thin band of gold. By the time Rosa stepped out of the tent, Nathaniel was already extinguishing the fire, rolling his sleeves up as if he'd never slept at all. His coat was dusted with pine needles. He must have dozed sitting up, boots planted, rifle across his lap like a guard dog that never truly rests. "You're up," he said simply. "You didn't sleep," she murmured. He glanced at her, quick, assessing. "I slept plenty." She said nothing. They both knew it was a lie. They resumed the trail, and by late afternoon the trees thinned and the valley opened into a sweeping expanse of rolling fields and timbered hillsides. Nestled against the foot of a granite bluff stood a massive two-story lodge built from thick, hand-hewn logs. Smoke curled from its stone chimney. The porch stretched wide, overlooking the spread of blackwood land. Rosa's breath caught. "This is your home?" "This is the main cabin," Nathaniel said, guiding the horses into the yard. "I built it when I still thought, never mind." He didn't finish the sentence, but she heard the ghost in it. A home big enough for children's laughter. A dining table meant for more than one plate. Bedrooms for futures that never came. Nathaniel halted the wagon and climbed down, offering a hand to her. Rosa hesitated. She'd never taken a stranger's hand before, but he wasn't quite that anymore. Not a stranger, not safe, not dangerous, something in between. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, warm despite the cold air. "Watch the step," he murmured. Inside, the cabin was even larger than she imagined. The central room held a towering stone fireplace, a long table, shelves lined with books and maps, and a massive bearskin rug near the hearth. A staircase climbed to a lofted second level. Everything looked lived in, yet untouched, like time had moved, but Nathaniel hadn't. "I'll show you your room," he said. He led her up the stairs to a spacious bedroom with a four-poster bed, quilts folded neatly at its foot, a wardrobe carved with mountain scenes, a writing desk, a window framed by heavy burgundy curtains. "This is far too nice for me," she blurted before she could help it. Nathaniel paused in the doorway. "Why would you think that?" She stared at the gleaming wood floors, the carved furniture. "Because I'm just—" "Don't say just," he interrupted quietly. "Not in this house." Her lips parted. She didn't understand. Not yet. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the far door. "Washroom's through there, hot water heater in back. Takes a little while to warm up, but you'll have a proper bath by supper time." A bath. Her own room. Curtains that weren't threadbare, floors that didn't creak with every step. It was too much. She clutched her hands to keep them from trembling. Nathaniel noticed, but instead of commenting, he stepped back. "Unpack. Settle in. Supper's in an hour. I'll start the cooking." "Wait." She blinked. "I thought that's my job." "It is," he said, descending the stairs, "but this is your first day. You're my guest until sunrise." Guest, not servant, not burden. The word landed gently, unsettling her more than the hardest blow. She unpacked slowly, touching each object as if afraid it would vanish. Her grandfather's Bible, her mother's shawl, the tin box of letters she'd never shown anyone. When she finished, she washed, braided her hair, and forced her breath to steady. She went downstairs and stopped. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration as he chopped vegetables. The kitchen smelled of onions and herbs, wood smoke, and anticipation. Rosa hesitated, then stepped forward. "You're cutting them wrong," she said softly. He looked up, almost surprised. "Wrong?" She approached the counter, nerves fluttering. "For a stew, you'll want the pieces larger. Otherwise they dissolve and lose flavor." Nathaniel stared at her for a long moment, then handed her the knife without a word. The shift was subtle, not command, not surrender, invitation. She began chopping, and he moved aside, stoking the stove, tending the pot. For the first time, they worked side by side. Her hands were sure, her movements practiced. She could feel his gaze on her from time to time, measuring not her body, but her skill, her presence. "You know your way around a kitchen," he finally said. "I had to," she murmured. "Grandfather depended on my cooking, and many winters, cooking was the only way I kept him from losing weight." Nathaniel listened, really listened. When the stew simmered, they sat at the long table, opposite ends, as if afraid of crossing some invisible line. Nathaniel took the first bite, swallowed, then met her eyes. "It's good," he said. "Very good." "Thank you." Another silence. But it wasn't cold this time. It was watchful, careful, curious. After supper she moved to gather the plates. He rose to help, but she shook her head. "You cooked, I'll clean." He nodded, then went to tend the fire. As she washed dishes, she watched him from the corner of her eye. His silhouette against the firelight was broad, powerful, but his movements carried a tiredness that pierced her. This wasn't a man who lived like a tyrant. This was a man who lived with ghosts. Later, when Rosa climbed the stairs to her room, Nathaniel remained by the hearth, staring into the flames as if they alone understood him. She paused at the landing, hand on the banister. Something unnameable tugged at her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the night. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone, and she wasn't sure which frightened her more. By the end of the first week, Rosa moved through Nathaniel Blackwood's great timbered cabin with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been running a household her entire life. She rose before sunrise, stoked the fire, prepared breakfast, tended the pantry, scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, and as she worked, Nathaniel's world, once hollow and echoing, began to fill again. But outside the cabin, a different world stirred, one with eyes and opinions. It began with a visit to the general store. Nathaniel needed flour and horse feed. Rosa needed needles, thread, and a block of lye. They rode into the valley town of Clearwater together, and the moment Rosa stepped off the wagon, conversation died like wind hitting stone. Two men near the saloon exchanged a look. The butcher's wife elbowed her friend. A ranch hand murmured something that made another snicker. Rosa kept her chin high, but heat crawled up her throat. She knew what they saw. A broad-hipped, round-faced woman in a house dress, stepping down from Blackwood's wagon as if she belonged there. Nathaniel saw it too. She felt his gaze settle on the men whispering near the hitching rail, his shoulders squared, jaw tightening, that dangerous stillness rolling off him like smoke before a fire. Inside the store, Rosa selected her thread and lye while Nathaniel loaded supplies. When she approached the counter, Mrs. Hargreaves gave her a thin smile. "So," the woman leaned in, "living with Mr. Blackwood now, are you?" Rosa steadied her hands. "I am his employee," Mrs. Hargreaves hummed. "Is that what he calls it?" Something sharp twisted inside Rosa's ribs. "And here, I thought he'd sworn off women after his tragedy," the woman continued, voice dripping with eager cruelty. "Imagine my surprise when he brings home a girl attached to a deed." Rosa stiffened. "I'm not attached to anything." "You were part of the sale." The woman shrugged. "People talk, dear. Best get used to it." Nathaniel appeared behind Rosa so suddenly, Mrs. Hargreaves stumbled backward. "We're done here," he said, dropping coins onto the counter. The woman swallowed. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't mean—" "Actually," he cut in, "you meant exactly what you said." He picked up Rosa's parcels and escorted her out with a hand hovering near her back. Not touching, but close enough she felt the heat of it. Rosa didn't speak until the wagon was rolling again. "They think I'm yours." Nathaniel guided the horses onto the mountain trail. "People will think anything that gives them a thrill." "It bothers you?" "What bothers me," he said, eyes fixed ahead, "is disrespect." "For me or for you?" He looked at her then, long, searching. "For you." Her breath caught. But before she could speak, thunder cracked across the sky. The storm came fast. Wyoming storms always did. One moment sunshine, the next a wall of silver rain sweeping down the ridges like a charge of cavalry. "Hold on," Nathaniel said, snapping the reins. "We need to reach the cabin before the pass floods." They reached it, barely, soaked and shivering. Rosa hurried inside to warm herself near the hearth, while Nathaniel secured the horses. Rain hammered the roof like fists trying to break through. When he finally came in, drenched to the bone, Rosa gasped. Water streamed from his hair and coat, dripping onto the floor. "You'll get sick," she said. "Sit, I'll get towels." But Nathaniel shook his head. Not yet. He closed the door behind him, bolted it, then turned toward her. The anger wasn't for her, but it filled the room like smoke. "People in this valley don't know you," he said. "They don't know how hard you worked to hold your grandfather's land. They don't know the strength it takes to survive alone." "I don't care what they think," she lied. "You do," he said gently, "because you were raised to care, and because their words cut deeper when you're already wounded." Her throat tightened. "What if they're right?" "About what?" "That I don't belong in a place like this, that I don't belong with someone like you." Something flickered in his eyes, something fierce, something protective. "You belong wherever you choose to stand," he said, stepping closer, "including my home." "It's your home," she whispered, "not mine." The storm roared, rattling the windows. Nathaniel studied her for a long, silent moment, rainwater still dripping from his hair. Then he said the one sentence that broke her breath in two. "It becomes your home the moment you decide you want it to be." Her lips parted. She stared at him as if the ground beneath her had shifted. "Why would you say that?" "Because," he said quietly, "you're not the only one trying to learn where you belong now." Lightning flashed, illuminating the rugged plains of his face, the wet strands clinging to his brow, the vulnerability he didn't mean to reveal but couldn't quite hide. Rosa felt her pulse stutter, fear, hope, and something deeper tangled into one. Before she could answer, before she could think, the front door shook violently. A fist, then another, pounding. Nathaniel stiffened. "Stay behind me." Rosa's heart lurched. "Who is it?" He reached for the rifle above the doorframe. "Trouble." Lightning split the sky again, revealing a silhouette on the porch. Broad shoulders, soaked hat, and the unmistakable swagger of a man who came not for a visit, but a claim. Nathaniel cocked the rifle. The knocking became a demand. "Open up, Blackwood!" a voice shouted through the storm. "I'm here for the girl." Rosa's blood turned to ice. Nathaniel stepped forward, every line of his body turning to iron. "She isn't yours to take." This was no longer whispers, no longer gossip. This was the storm she didn't know was coming. The storm hammered the cabin like a living thing, rain slicing sideways, wind clawing at the shutters. Rosa stood frozen behind Nathaniel as he leveled the rifle toward the door, the fire casting violent shadows across the walls. "Stay close," he murmured, voice steady as bedrock. Rosa's breath trembled. "Who is it?" Before he could answer, the man outside pounded again. "Blackwood!" the voice roared. "You open this door, or I break it down." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Reed Turner. The name hit Rosa like a slap. Reed Turner, the neighbor whose ranch bordered her grandfather's land on the east side. A man who used to eye her whenever he came to buy eggs, whose stare crawled across her skin like something alive. A man her grandfather warned her to avoid. "He thinks he has a claim," Nathaniel said darkly. "He doesn't." Another blow shook the door. "Nate Blackwood, you son of a—" "I know she's in there," Reed bellowed. "That big Whitmore girl. That land was supposed to be mine, and so was she." Rosa's knees weakened. "No." Nathaniel pivoted sharply. "You don't move. You don't speak. Understand?" She nodded, barely breathing. Another slam, another threat. "Open up," Reed snarled. "She owes me a debt. Her granddaddy promised—" "He promised you nothing," Nathaniel growled under his breath. "Turner's been trying to get his hands on Whitmore land for years. And on you." Rosa's heart lurched sickly. "Why?" Nathaniel looked at her with something like sorrow. "Because men like Reed see a woman with no one left to protect her and think that makes her available." She swallowed hard, bile rising. Nathaniel stepped forward and unbolted the door, just enough to open it a crack, enough for the storm wind to blast in. He kept the rifle angled high, ready, eyes like sharpened steel. Reed Turner stood on the porch in a soaked duster, hat dripping, a revolver holstered at his hip and a sneer twisting his face. "Well now," Reed drawled, "thought I'd find her here." "You're trespassing," Nathaniel said. "I'm claiming what's owed to me." Reed shoved a folded sheet of paper toward him, rain-soaked, crumpled, half illegible. "Albert Whitmore promised me first right to the land when he died. I was supposed to get the place and the girl to settle his debt." Nathaniel didn't even glance at the paper. "Whitmore owed no debt to you." "Oh, but he did." Reed leaned in, eyes gleaming. "He took a loan from me last winter, $50, signed with witnesses, and the collateral listed is the farm and Rosalind Whitmore's hand in marriage." Rosa gasped, hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible. My grandfather would never—" Reed smirked. "Old man was desperate, and I kept him fed for months. He told me himself I could claim the girl when he passed." Nathaniel's grip on the rifle tightened. His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You forged it." "Doesn't matter," Reed spat. "Town will believe me over a girl who lost everything but her appetite." Rosa flinched. Nathaniel's eyes turned murderous. "You're not taking her," he said. Reed laughed. "Blackwood, you think you can keep her? Whole town saw you drag her off like property, and I'll bet every coin in my pocket you haven't told her the truth yet." Nathaniel's jaw twitched. Rosa stiffened. "What truth?" Reed's smile widened, triumphant and vile. "Tell her, Nate. Tell her why you were so eager to buy up Whitmore land." Nathaniel didn't look at Rosa, didn't speak. Reed pressed harder. "Tell her what's underneath it." Nathaniel's voice was gravel. "Leave." Reed ignored him. "That land you bought? There's a spring under it that feeds into your grazing fields. You needed it to keep your cattle alive. Without it, your whole ranch would fall apart." Rosa felt the room sway. "So I was part of a business decision, she whispered. No, Nathaniel said immediately, but he still didn't turn toward her. Reed laughed triumphantly. You bought the girl with the water rights, Blackwood. Might as well admit it. Nathaniel raised the rifle. Last warning. Reed stepped back, but kept talking, voice rising over the storm. She's mine by right, and I'll bring the sheriff if I have to drag her out myself. The moment the words left his mouth, Nathaniel swung the door open fully and stepped onto the porch, towering, soaked, and radiating cold fury. You come onto my land again, he said, voice low and lethal. You won't walk off it. Reed's hand moved toward his holster. Nathaniel cocked the rifle in an instant. Reed froze. The storm cracked overhead. Finally, Reed spat into the mud. This isn't over. Then he mounted his horse and galloped into the rain. Nathaniel watched until Reed vanished between the dark trees, then shut the door and rebolted it with shaking hands, not fear, but barely contained rage. When he turned, Rosa stood in the center of the room, trembling. So, she said quietly, voice tight and raw, is it true? Nathaniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Rosa felt something inside her break. You bought my land because you needed the water. That wasn't all, Nathaniel said, stepping toward her. But it was enough, she whispered. Lightning flashed, illuminating her expression, hurt, humiliation, betrayal. It lit Nathaniel's face, too, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked afraid. He reached for her. Rosa. She stepped back, tears filling her eyes. Don't, please, not right now. The fire crackled. The storm wailed. The truth sat between them, sharp as shattered glass. You said I belonged wherever I chose to stand, she whispered, but you didn't tell me you needed the land more than you ever needed me here. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Blackwood had no words. The storm swallowed the mountains whole. Rain hammered the roof in unbroken sheets. Wind howled around the eaves, and the world outside blurred into a single, violent roar. But inside the cabin, the silence between Rosa and Nathaniel was louder than any thunder. Rosa stood motionless beside the hearth, her breath trembling. Nathaniel stood several feet away, soaked through, fists clenched, chest rising and falling with the effort to hold himself back. I need the water, he finally said. That part is true. Rosa closed her eyes. Then Reed was right. No, his voice cracked through the room like a whip. Reed is a liar, and you know it. Do I? She whispered. The pain in her voice hit him harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. He took a step toward her. Rosa stepped back. He stopped instantly, as if her retreat had tied his feet to the floor. I bought that land, he said slowly, because it borders mine, because it keeps my cattle alive, and because your grandfather worked himself to the bone, keeping it out of men like Reed Turner's hands. Rosa's eyes snapped open, glistening. Then why didn't you tell me? Nathaniel exhaled, one long, painful breath. Because I didn't want the first truth you heard about yourself here to be that you were part of a negotiation. She flinched. You weren't, he added fiercely. Not to me, not for a single moment. She shook her head, voice breaking. But the land matters to you. Yes, he said, but not the way you think. When she didn't respond, he moved to the fireplace, peeling off his wet coat and tossing it over a chair. Water dripped from his hair, his shirt clinging to the powerful frame beneath. Yet even in the firelight, he looked smaller, stripped of the armor silence had always given him. My life is built on things I can control, he said quietly. Land, cattle, timber, seasons, calculations. He lifted his gaze. You're the first thing in 12 years I haven't been able to control. Her breath caught. I'm not trying to be difficult. You're not difficult, he said, voice almost gentle. You're unexpected. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the windows. Rosa wrapped her arms around herself. The room suddenly felt too large, too exposed. Nathaniel, she whispered, I came here because I didn't have a choice. And I've tried, truly tried to make this place feel like somewhere I belong, but right now I feel like— She swallowed hard. Like I'm tied to something I can't walk away from. He absorbed her words with a slow, pained stillness, as if each one carved into him. You're not tied to me, he said, every word deliberate, not by contract, not by debt, not by expectation. If you want to leave tomorrow, I'll take you wherever you choose. Rosa's eyes widened. You would? I'd hate it, he said without hesitation, voice rough, but I'd do it. Her tears spilled then, quiet, unsteady, too heavy to hold back. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady herself. Nathaniel stepped forward an inch. Rosa? She shook her head quickly. Please, don't touch me right now. If you do, I'll fall apart completely. He froze, fingers curling painfully at his sides. Then I won't touch you, he said softly, but I'm here all night, as long as you need. She turned away, breaking under the weight of everything, fear, hope, betrayal, longing. The cabin that had felt warm hours ago now felt like unfamiliar territory. I'm going upstairs, she whispered. I just need to think. He nodded once, just once. Take whatever time you need. Rosa climbed the stairs with trembling legs. At the landing, she paused, glancing back. Nathaniel stood like a statue in the center of the room, soaked, weary, hollow-eyed, but watching her with a tenderness he didn't know how to hide. Their eyes met. Something in her chest twisted painfully, but she turned away. In her room, she shut the door and pressed her back to it, sobbing into her hands. Every doubt she'd ever swallowed rose up again. Too big, too soft, too naive, too easy to push aside, and now too easy to use. But beneath it all lay something far more terrifying. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to lose him. Downstairs, Nathaniel sat by the fire, elbows on his knees, head bowed. The storm outside raged on, but the storm inside him was worse. He'd protected her, sheltered her, given her a home. But he'd also failed her in the one way that mattered most. He hadn't told her the truth. He stayed awake until morning. He never once moved from that spot. And when Rosa finally came down the stairs at sunrise, eyes swollen, hands shaking, heart raw, he rose to his feet like a man bracing for a verdict. Rosa, he said quietly, whatever you decide today, I'll respect it. Her voice was barely more than breath. I haven't decided anything yet. He nodded. Then let me show you something before you do. She hesitated, then followed him outside. The sun was just breaking over the mountains, lighting the valley with gold. Nathaniel led her past the barn, past the corrals, toward a small hill behind the cabin. At the top stood two simple cedar markers. Fresh flowers lay at their base. Rosa froze. Your wife and daughter? Nathaniel nodded. His voice was a low tremor. This is the truth I should have told you first. Not the land, not Reed. This. He knelt beside the graves, fingers brushing the damp earth. Every decision I make, every piece of land I buy, every person I keep at arm's length, it all comes back to losing them. Rosa stared at him, at the fierce, broken devotion carved into his face. "I didn't bring you here because of what your land can give me," he said. "I brought you here because for the first time in 12 years I wanted someone in my home, and that terrified me." Rosa's breath hitched. He rose slowly and faced her. Rainlight caught in his lashes. "But I will never use you," he said. "I will never own you, and you will never owe me a single thing." Her heart cracked open. "Nathaniel." "Yes?" "I don't know if I can trust you yet." His expression didn't change, only deepened with quiet acceptance. "Then let me earn it." The wind stirred Rosa's hair. The cabin stood behind them, fire smoke curling from its chimney. The grave markers before them glowed softly in the morning light. Rosa took a single step toward him. Just one. "I haven't decided if this is my home," she whispered, "but I haven't decided it isn't." Something eased in Nathaniel's face, small, restrained, but real. "Then we'll take this slow," he said, "as slow as you need." A fragile peace settled between them, not resolution, but possibility. And sometimes, in the mountains, possibility was the closest thing to hope. The storm had passed, leaving the mountains washed clean, ridges gleaming gold beneath the morning sun, the air crisp with pine and wet earth. But inside Rosa, the storm had only begun to settle. She and Nathaniel walked back to the cabin in silence, not heavy silence, not the painful kind from the night before, a quieter one, a searching one. Nathaniel held the door for her, then stepped inside without closing the space between them. He moved with deliberate restraint, as if every gesture was a vow not to crowd her, not to assume anything, not to push. Rosa removed her shawl, hand still trembling faintly, and placed it over the chair by the fire. Nathaniel watched, only watched, until she turned toward him. "About yesterday," she began, voice soft, but steady. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. She hesitated. "Maybe I need to give one." He said nothing, waiting. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go," she said, "but I stayed because it felt safe, warmer, kinder than I expected." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "Good." And when Reed said those things, about land, about me, some part of me believed him. Nathaniel flinched, the slightest movement, but a deep one. "I don't want to believe him any more," she continued. "I'm trying not to." Something in his posture eased, the unbearable tension winding through his shoulders, loosening by a fraction. "Rosa," he said quietly, "I will never lie to you again. Not about land, not about Reed, not about anything." She looked at him, really looked. The scar along his jaw, the faint streaks of silver in his dark hair, the grief that had shaped him, and the gentleness he didn't know how to show without fear of it being taken. "I don't expect perfection," she said. "I just expect truth." "You'll have it," he replied, almost a whisper. Her throat tightened. She believed him, not completely, not blindly, but enough to breathe again. The fire crackled softly. Nathaniel stepped closer, slowly, giving her space to stop him if she wished. When she didn't, he lifted one hand, hovering near her cheek without touching. "May I?" he asked. The question alone unraveled her. No man had ever asked before. No one had ever cared enough to ask. She nodded once. His fingertips touched her cheek, not claiming, not demanding, just a warm, careful brush against her skin. Her breath caught. Nathaniel's thumb traced a silent apology across her cheekbone. "You're safe here," he murmured, "as long as you want to be." Her eyes burned. She leaned, just slightly, into his hand. "I want to be," she whispered, "but I'm still scared." "Then we'll be scared together." Her lips parted with a shaky exhale. "Nathaniel." He stepped back, dropping his hand, giving her space again. "Come downstairs when you're ready. We'll eat breakfast, then work. Routine helps." "Routine," she echoed, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "Yes, I think it does." She started up the stairs, but paused halfway. He was watching her, not with hunger, not with the possessive intensity from the courthouse, but with something far more dangerous, something hopeful. She swallowed. "This place, this cabin, it could become a home." "It already is," he said softly. "It's yours for as long as you want it." Her fingers tightened on the railing. "I don't know how long that is yet." He nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Rosa held his gaze for one full heartbeat longer. Then she went upstairs, to change, to breathe, to begin again. Nathaniel remained at the bottom of the stairs long after she disappeared, letting his heart settle around the fragile truth. She hadn't chosen him, not yet, but she hadn't walked away. And in the mountains, that was the first step toward something stronger than the storms that had nearly broken them both. Stories like this linger in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, where fear softens, where courage begins, where two broken lives discover they might fit together after all. If you're still here with me, listening from a kitchen, a bedroom, a night shift, a lonely road halfway across the world, tell me where you are. Your voice turns these mountains into something alive. And if you still believe love can rise again, even after truth cuts deep, then stay close. The next story is already reaching for you. Too fat to ride. Stage driver rejected obese woman publicly. Mountain man's cold fury. Too fat to ride. You'll break the damned stage in half. Buck Harrelson's shout cracked through the heat like a whip, and the crowd roared with laughter. In front of the Wells Fargo office in Bitter Springs, the late afternoon sun turned the street into a shimmering pan of dust and heat. Chickens scratched near the boardwalk. A mangy dog slept under a wagon, and half the town had gathered for their favorite pastime, watching someone else get humiliated. At the center of it all stood Georgiana George Sullivan, 31 years old, dress sticking to her back with sweat, a worn carpetbag in one hand and a neatly folded ticket in the other. She was big, over 220 pounds, and there was no way to hide it. In a crowd like this, her body wasn't just seen, it was used. A target, a joke, an excuse. "I purchased a ticket," George said, forcing each word through a throat that wanted to close. "Paid in advance. The company accepted my money. You are required to transport me to Prescott." Buck leaned back on his heels, thumbs hooked in his belt, tobacco-stained mustache twitching with a smirk. "Lady, I'm required not to kill my horses. You get on that stage and we'll be dragging Belly from here to the next station. You want Prescott? Start walking. Might melt some of that lard off." Laughter exploded. Someone near the back called, "Watch out, Buck. She'll tip the whole rig when she breathes." Another voice, female, sharp as a sewing needle. "If she breaks the axle, we all die with her. Some people are just too selfish to stay home." George's cheeks burned so hot they almost matched the Arizona sky. She'd heard it all before. Too big for the pew, too heavy for the wagon, too greedy for kindness. But today, those words threatened more than her pride. They threatened the job waiting for her in Prescott, the housekeeping position that might finally mean enough food, a real bed, a life that wasn't all scrimping and shame. "Return my fare, then," she said, fingers shaking around the ticket. "If you won't honor it, you owe me a refund." Buck spat a long brown stream that landed just shy of her boot. "Take it up with the company. I'm the driver, this is my stage, and I say you ain't riding. Now move along before I have the sheriff drag you off." Before we go on, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from right now? And have you ever seen someone mocked in public just for how they look? George turned away because she couldn't stand one more second of their grinning faces and slammed straight into a wall. Not a building, a man. He was enormous, towering over everyone on the street, built like the trunk of a pine tree. Buckskin trousers, faded red shirt, leather vest worn to softness. His hair was long and dark with threads of silver, tied back with a strip of leather. His face was all hard plains and old scars, his jaw rough with stubble, but it was his eyes that stilled the street. Pale gray, cold, flat, the color of winter water that had seen men drown. He looked down at George, not with disgust, not with amusement, just one slow measuring sweep that took in her clenched jaw, her crushed ticket, the laughter at her back. Then he turned that same frozen gaze on Buck Harrelson. "Stage heading to Prescott?" he asked, voice low and rough like stones grinding together. Buck shifted, suddenly less sure of himself. "That's right. Leaves in 5 minutes. You got a ticket?" "Don't need one," the stranger said. "I ride my own horse." He tipped his head toward the massive Appaloosa tied at the post. "But I got a question." He pointed, not at the stage, not at the horses, at George. "That woman paid to ride," he said, voice dropping colder. "Why isn't she on that coach?" Buck Harrelson snorted, but there was a twitch in it now, a tiny crack in his swagger. "That's my business," he said. "Drivers got final say on passengers. Regulations say so." The stranger didn't blink. "Regulations also say you don't cheat paying customers." She bought a ticket. "The stage can handle 1,500 pounds. 4 passengers, 1 driver, 1 guard, 1 woman. You're nowhere near the limit." Buck's jaw worked. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling you a coward," the man replied, voice soft enough that people had to lean in to hear, and they did. "Hiding your small, mean heart behind fake concern for your horses." A murmur ran through the crowd. No one talked to Buck Harrelson like that. No one. George stood very still. Her heart thudded against her ribs, her fingers clenched around the ticket until the paper crinkled. She knew exactly how this usually went. A man would step up, say something mildly decent, then wilt under the weight of the crowd's laughter. People didn't stand up to bullies like Buck for long, certainly not for her. Buck spat again, aiming closer to the stranger's boots this time. "Who the hell are you, anyway?" The man's gaze never left his. "Caleb Stone." The name dropped into the dust like a stone into still water. The ripples were visible on every face. Someone near the back swore softly. "That's the wolf of the superstitions." "Bounty hunter," another muttered. "Took down 6 men in one night down near Yuma." "Survived 2 Apache raids," a third whispered. "They say bullets dodge him out of respect." George had heard the name in 6 saloons and boarding houses, spoken with a mix of fear and superstition. Caleb Stone, big as a bear, cold as January, no mercy to spare and no heart to speak of. A man like that didn't protect people. He hunted them. Buck's bravado faltered. "I don't care if you're the governor. This is my stage. Caleb took a single step closer. The movement was slow, almost lazy. but it shrank the space between them until Buck had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "Here's how this goes," Caleb said quietly. "You let the woman ride like she paid to do. You load her carpet bag. You drive your stage to Prescott without one more word out of your mouth about her weight. You do your job. Or—" He paused, and in that silence everyone seemed to stop breathing. "Or I walk into your office, collect whatever petty pay you got coming, and buy this stage run for the day. Then I hire a different driver who knows the difference between weight and worth." Buck laughed, but it came out thin. "You? Buy the whole run?" Caleb gave him a long, flat look. "I just collected $600 in bounty money down in Tucson. How much does Wells Fargo pay you to spit on customers?" There was another ripple of sound, this one not laughter, but something like satisfaction. People loved a show, but even more than that, they loved a bully being cornered. Buck's face mottled red. His gaze darted to the bystanders looking for support. "You all hearing this? He's threatening me over her." He jabbed a finger toward George without looking at her. "Over a woman who'll have us crawling all the way to Prescott." No one stepped in. Not the men who'd laughed. Not the women who'd smirked. Not the sheriff leaning in a nearby doorway, weighing how far he'd have to go to break up a real fight. George watched it all with a strange, detached clarity. This was her life in miniature, mocked, blamed, used as an excuse. But for the first time, something different was happening. Someone had decided not to move around her, not to ignore her, not to use her as a punchline. Someone had drawn a line in the dust and said, "Enough. Last chance," Caleb said. "She rides, or I own your rig by sundown." The desert wind blew a swirl of grit across their boots. Buck swallowed. "Fine," he snapped. "She can ride, but when that axle snaps—" "It won't," Caleb said, "because you'll drive like a man with sense for once in your life." He stepped back, giving George a clear path to the stage. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he looked down at her, and for the first time his gaze wasn't cold. It was measuring, yes, but there was respect in it. "Get on, Miss Sullivan," he said. "You've got a place to be." Her throat tightened. "How do you know my name?" "Ticket office keeps records," he replied. "You're not the only one who can read." There was the faintest flicker of wry humor in his eyes. It startled her more than his size. George climbed the stage steps, conscious of every creak of wood, every watching eye. When her boot slipped on the top step, a hand closed around the rail just above hers, large, calloused, steady. She didn't need the help, not really, but the gesture was there, unspoken, unforced. She took her seat inside. The other passengers were already there, 2 gamblers, a cattle buyer, and a woman in a stiff traveling dress who pressed herself as far away from George as the bench would allow. "If this kills us, I'll haunt you," the woman muttered under her breath. George looked past her, out the window, where Caleb Stone was swinging into the saddle of his Appaloosa. He didn't glance at the coach again, didn't tip his hat, didn't try to soften what had just happened with one scrap of gentleness. He simply took his place beside the moving stage as Buck cracked the whip, riding parallel like a shadow carved from iron and winter. George pressed her ticket into her skirt pocket and focused on breathing. "He didn't do it for you," she told herself, as the town of Bitter Springs shrank into a smear of dust behind them. Men like that don't care about anyone. But her hands were still shaking, and not just from the leftover sting of humiliation, because for the first time In a very long time, someone had looked at her and decided she was worth fighting for. Even if he swore it meant nothing. The first hours of the trip passed in punishing silence. The stage rattled over ruts and dry washouts, the cabin swaying with every jolt. Dust seeped through the cracks in the wooden frame, coating everything, skin, clothes, lungs, with a gritty dryness that made speaking feel like swallowing sand. George kept her eyes fixed on the window, refusing to look at the passengers pressed uncomfortably close around her. The cattle buyer muttered curses each time the wheels hit a rut. The woman in the stiff dress kept her handkerchief pressed dramatically over her nose, as though George's presence somehow fouled the desert air. The two gamblers compared scars and lied about their winnings. No one spoke to her. No one asked her name, or why she traveled alone, or where she would stay in Prescott. She had long ago learned to expect that. But what she hadn't expected, not even remotely, was the shadow that rode beside them. Caleb Stone stayed with the stage, not talking, not watching her, not interfering, just there, a silent presence carved from dust and steel. Every time the stage lurched, George caught a glimpse of him through the window, riding slightly ahead, scanning the horizon the way a man does who expects trouble. His coat flapped against the Appaloosa's flank, the leather creaking with each movement. His expression never changed. He might have been a monument sculpted by the desert wind. Once, when the stage dipped sharply and threw George against the side panel, she sucked in a gasp, and Caleb's head snapped toward her instantly. Just one look, sharp, assessing. Then he faced forward again. A stranger might have missed it. The gamblers certainly did, lost in their own noise. But George saw it. That look wasn't disgust. It was alertness, concern, a readiness to act if she needed help, but wouldn't ask. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. The desert stretched endlessly on. Flat, dry basins giving way to rocky cliffs, then narrow canyon paths where the air cooled and shadows cut deep across the red stone. As evening approached, they stopped at a relay station, a squat adobe building with a tired windmill and a horse corral. The passengers stretched their legs, complaining loudly. George stepped out last, careful on the narrow stairs. The station master, a grizzled man missing half his teeth, took one look at her and barked, "She better not eat more'n her share. Supplies been short." George stiffened. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to say she rarely ate more than bread because she couldn't afford anything else. But Caleb spoke first. "She'll eat what she wants," he said from the shadows, "and you'll shut up about it." The station master blinked like he'd just been slapped. Caleb moved past him without breaking stride, checking the horses, inspecting the harnesses, scanning the horizon. George followed the other passengers inside, where a pot of lukewarm beans simmered on the stove. She took a modest spoonful and sat in the corner. The gamblers shoveled down heaping plates. The cattle buyer complained that the beans were burnt. The stiff-dressed woman declared the entire station unfit for civilized travelers. George ate quietly. Caleb never came inside. When the stage was ready to continue, the sun had begun to set, turning the desert sky into molten gold. George climbed back into the coach, bracing herself for the long night ahead. But as the driver snapped the reins, she noticed something different. Caleb rode closer now, close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders each time the passengers shouted at one another, close enough that she could see the dust on his eyelashes, close enough that she could tell, by the way he constantly scanned the ridges, that something felt wrong, and he was expecting it. The night deepened. A cold wind swept down from the high rocks, slipping through the cracks in the coach and raising goosebumps on George's skin. Her thin dress wasn't enough to keep the chill away. She pressed her arms around herself, shivering despite her size. The woman beside her muttered, "Honestly, even her breathing takes up space." George stared at her lap, fighting back the tightening in her throat. A sudden knock on the window made her jump. Caleb's voice came through the wood. "You cold in there?" The passengers fell silent. George hesitated. A little. A rustle. A pause. Then the coach door opened, and Caleb passed a thick wool blanket inside. Not to the gamblers, not to the cattle buyer, not to the stiff-dressed woman. He handed it directly to George. The passengers stared. Caleb didn't. He just said, "Wrap up. Desert nights will skin you alive," and shut the door without waiting for thanks. George clutched the blanket to her chest, warmth seeping through her trembling fingers. She didn't know what shocked her more, his action or the simple lack of hesitation behind it. No disgust, no smirking, no commentary about her size, just a blanket, just warmth, just care. The gamblers muttered. The woman scoffed. The cattle buyer rolled his eyes. But none of it mattered. For the first time since leaving Bitter Springs, George breathed deeply enough that her lungs expanded without pain. Outside, Caleb rode like a silent sentinel, his silhouette a dark shield against the moonlit desert, and George realized something terrifying and wonderful all at once. He hadn't done any of this for approval or praise or show. He'd done it because something in him, something cold and scarred and buried deep, had decided she deserved protecting. She'd never felt that before, and she wasn't sure she knew what to do with it. The next morning, long before the sun had finished rising over the rugged horizon, the stage limped into Prescott, dusty, rattling, exhausted. The passengers spilled out gratefully. George climbed down last, the blanket Caleb had given her folded neatly in her arms. She meant to return it, but Caleb never came over. He had already ridden ahead toward the sheriff's office with the bandits tied behind the stage long before she could gather the courage to speak. By the time she retrieved her carpetbag, he was gone completely, vanished into the maze of streets like a ghost who had never been there. For 3 days, George waited for him to reappear. She told herself it was foolish. He had made no promises. He wasn't a man who lingered in towns, especially not on her account. But the blanket stayed folded at the foot of her boarding-house bed, untouched, except when she held it in both hands and wondered why her heart squeezed so hard. When she finally secured the housekeeper position with the Carson family, life became a blur of mopping, laundering, cooking, and managing a household full of children, dogs, and sharp-tongued adults. She worked from sunrise until the lamps were lit at night, every muscle aching, her dress soaked with sweat, despite the cooler, high-country air. Weeks passed, then months, and in all that time, Caleb Stone did not appear. By the time 6 months had gone, George told herself she had imagined the strange warmth in his actions. He had only been practical, efficient, calculating. A man like that didn't form attachments, certainly not to a woman like her. But then, one evening in early spring, the Carson dogs began barking furiously outside. George stepped out onto the back porch, wiping flour from her hands, and froze. Caleb Stone stood at the edge of the yard, hat in hand, looking like a man who had been dragged backward through a thorn thicket. His clothes were torn, covered in dust, and his jaw was bruised purple like he'd taken a punch that surprised even him. George didn't think. She ran. "You're hurt," she said, reaching him breathlessly. "No," he replied. "Just ugly." Then, softer, "You look well." It was the longest sentence he'd spoken to her since Bitter Springs. She ushered him inside before he could argue, sat him at the kitchen table, fetched a tin of salve, and dabbed carefully at the bruise along his jaw. Caleb remained perfectly still, like a boulder accepting the touch of moss. "What happened?" George asked finally. "Tracked a man across 3 counties," he said. "He didn't want to be found." "And you came here right after?" "Yes." "Why?" Caleb's eyes flicked to hers. "Wanted to see you." The simple honesty of it hit her like a physical force. She sat back, hands trembling. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then George said, quietly, "You don't owe me anything, Caleb. You don't have to pretend." "I don't pretend," he cut in. "I don't know how." She swallowed hard. Then, "Why me?" He stared at the table for a long moment, as though searching for words he hadn't used in years. "Because you endure," he said at last. "Most people break, or they bend. You don't. You stand there and take the world's cruelty without giving it anything back. Strongest person I know." Her heart stuttered. "Strong? Caleb, I wasn't strong. I was humiliated. I was terrified. I was alive," he said. "Still breathing, still fighting. That's what strength is." She looked down at her hands, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. "Stay for supper," she said softly. "Please." He did. He sat at the table while she finished cooking the Carson family's meal, roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. She worked quickly, efficiently, but she could feel his eyes follow her every movement. Not hungrily, not possessively, attentively. When the family had eaten, and the children were bathed, and the dishes were washed, George walked Caleb out the back door into the twilight. "I have something that belongs to you," she said, stepping into her small room. She returned with the blanket, freshly cleaned and neatly folded. "I've kept it since the stage ride. I meant to return it sooner, but—" "Keep it," he said. "No," she insisted. "I don't want to take something of yours." "Keep it," he repeated. "I gave it to you. That's the end of it." She hesitated. "Why?" Caleb didn't answer for several long moments. His face was half shadowed by the fading light, his eyes unreadable. "Because," he said finally, "it's the closest thing I have to something that still feels warm." George nearly stopped breathing. The next day, Caleb returned with fresh venison wrapped in cloth. "For your kitchen," he said. The day after, he showed up with a new broom handle because he'd noticed the old one was splitting. The next week, he repaired the Carson chicken coop without being asked. The week after that, he carved George a cooking spoon from juniper wood. He didn't court her with flowers or poetry. He didn't soften his voice or hide his scars. He was simply there, reliable, steady, cold on the outside, but with a loyalty that felt like standing beside a winter fire, harsh, but capable of warming the bone. One evening, after he had fixed a sticking door hinge, George poured him coffee at the kitchen table. Their hands brushed when she handed him the cup, and Caleb jerked back slightly as though he'd burned himself. "Sorry," she murmured. He shook his head. "Not your fault. Just not used to." He trailed off, jaw tightening. "Used to what?" she asked. "Kindness," he said, hands near mine without meaning harm. George swallowed hard. "You deserve kindness." "Not from most," he said, "but maybe from you." She reached across the table, very slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Her fingers touched his, warm, solid, steady. For a heartbeat, he didn't move at all. Then his hand turned, enclosing hers gently but firmly. He didn't speak again, didn't need to. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside the small kitchen, their hands remained joined across the wood, and George realized that this small, quiet moment was more intimate than any kiss, because a man like Caleb Stone didn't give touch easily, but he gave it to her. Spring in Prescott came early that year, wildflowers pushing up through dry earth, the scent of juniper drifting down from the hills. For a time, life settled into a rhythm so steady that George almost forgot she had spent most of her adult years holding her breath. Caleb would ride out for bounties, a week here, 4 days there, but he always returned, always with something small in hand, a bundle of sagebrush he thought smelled nice, a tin of coffee from a mining camp, a knife he'd sharpened for her kitchen. He never said the words, never named what they were to each other, but his presence filled every quiet corner of her life. And then one morning, 2 things happened at once. The first was a letter. It arrived sealed with black wax, addressed to Miss Georgiana Sullivan, housekeeper, Carson Residence. George opened it at the kitchen table after breakfast, her hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was slanted and elegant. Georgiana, your father passed 3 weeks ago. As his legal heir, you are entitled to the deeds of his property in Bitter Springs. However, there is a complication involving your half-brother Jacob. You must come at once. Bryant Hale, attorney at law, her father, dead. A man who had spent her entire childhood spitting insults instead of love. A man who had called her useless, lazy, stupid, too big to ever be wanted by any God-fearing man. George felt nothing, or perhaps too many things to sort into anything real. The kitchen blurred slightly as she folded the letter. She had no desire to see the property, no desire to revisit Bitter Springs, and even less desire to hear Jacob Sullivan's name spoken aloud. She knew of him only in passing, one of her father's earlier children who had disappeared into outlaw life long before George was even born. If he wanted the land, he could have it. She wanted no connection to any of them. But before she could process it, trouble came riding straight to Carson's front door. By mid-afternoon, a dust cloud formed on the road leading to the estate. George saw it from the kitchen window and froze. 5 men, horses lathered from hard riding, guns at their hips. The Carson's foreman stepped onto the porch. "State your business," he called. One of the riders raised a folded paper. "We're here for Georgiana Sullivan, by order of Sheriff Winslow." George felt her pulse spasm. Sheriff Winslow ran Bitter Springs, and she knew exactly how that man felt about women like her. He had thrown her out of his jail once, claiming she took up too much space to be arrested properly. "Housekeeper!" the rider barked. "Come out, now!" The Carsons gathered behind the foreman, whispering nervously. The children peered through the window. George stood rooted to the floorboards. Then hooves thundered behind the riders. A second cloud of dust. A single horse, moving fast. George didn't need to see the rider's face. She felt it in her bones. Caleb Stone slid off his Appaloosa before the animal had finished stopping, boots slamming into the dirt as he strode forward like a storm wrapped in leather and bone. "What in hell do you want with her?" he demanded, voice like a knife through the heat. The leader held up the paper. Sheriff says she's wanted for questioning. Something about inheritance. Something about a brother. She's not going anywhere with you, Caleb cut in. The men shifted uneasily. No one wanted to pick a fight with the wolf of the superstitions. It's legal business, the leader insisted. We ain't here to arrest her. You show up with guns drawn and 5 riders deep, Caleb snapped. That's not legal business. That's intimidation. The foreman stepped aside as Caleb reached the porch and positioned himself between George and the riders. She had never seen him like this, not in Bitter Springs, not on the road, not even in the quiet evenings at the table. This was Caleb Stone, fully awake, fully alive, and fully dangerous. George stepped forward. Caleb, it's all right. They're here to drag you someplace you don't want to go, he growled. I'm not allowing it. His protectiveness should have felt patronizing. It didn't. It felt like a shield she hadn't known she was allowed to stand behind. The leader of the riders cleared his throat. We don't want trouble with you, Stone. Sheriff said, bring her in, that's all. Says her father's property is contested. Says her half-brother Jacob's making a claim. Jacob? Caleb repeated quietly, and the meaning in that single word made every rider stiffen. George swallowed. He's the one you were tracking? Yes, Caleb said, and he's the one who's about to use you as leverage. He turned back to the riders. Tell Winslow she's not riding anywhere until I come in with her. And if Jacob Sullivan wants something from her, his eyes hardened into steel. He'll have to get through me. The leader hesitated, but Caleb Stone was not a man you defied lightly. Finally, the riders wheeled their horses and galloped away the way they'd come. Silence fell. George let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Caleb, that was reckless. Sheriff Winslow will be furious. Jacob... Caleb lifted her chin gently so she had to meet his eyes. Listen to me, he said. Your father abused you. Your half-brother became a criminal. None of them ever protected you. But I will. I'm not yours to protect, she said softly, though her voice trembled. Yes, Caleb said, equally soft, but 10 times firmer. You are. Her breath caught. I know you don't think you deserve loyalty, he continued, thumb brushing her cheek, but you do, and I'll stand between you and anyone who tries to drag you back into the past you survived. George's vision blurred. I don't want any of their money, or land, or anything. Then you won't take it, he said, but Jacob wants something, and when a man like him wants something, he destroys everything around it. Fear pricked her skin. What do we do? Caleb took her hand. We go to Bitter Springs together, he said. We face this head on, and when the dust settles, you walk away with what's yours. What is that? She whispered. Peace, he said. A future, a life they can't touch. The Carsons watched from the windows. The wind stirred dust around their boots. The world seemed to hold its breath. George squeezed Caleb's hand. Then I'll go, she said, but only if you're with me. His jaw softened, not enough to call it a smile, but enough to tell her she had said the right thing. Always, he said. The road back to Bitter Springs cut through hard, unforgiving country, parched riverbeds, jagged hills, and long stretches of silence where only the wind and distant coyotes kept company. George rode behind Caleb on his Appaloosa, her arms around his waist, the horse's powerful stride carrying them steadily toward the place she least wanted to see again. Caleb spoke little during the journey. When he did, It was only to warn her of loose shale or to shift her position when the saddle grew uncomfortable. But his presence, solid, unyielding, a wall of muscle and heat in front of her, made the journey bearable. For the first time in her life, George walked toward her past without trembling. By the time they reached Bitter Springs, dusk had draped the town in shadows. The Wells Fargo office, the saloon, the sheriff's office, it all looked smaller than she remembered. Or perhaps she had grown. Sheriff Winslow waited on the boardwalk, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, smugness dripping from every line of his leathery face. "Well," he said, eyeing George with a smirk, "look what the desert coughed back up. Sullivan girl, didn't think we'd see you again." Caleb dismounted and helped George down before she could refuse. Then he stepped in front of her, not blocking her view, but shield enough that she could breathe. "Cut the talk," Caleb said. "Where's Jacob Sullivan?" Winslow chuckled. "He came in yesterday. Says the land your daddy left is his by blood. Says Georgiana here stole the deeds and skipped town with 'em." George stiffened. "What? I don't even want the property." Winslow ignored her. "Jacob claims she kept his share of the inheritance. Says she's been lying low in Prescott while he starved in the mines. Says he wants justice." Caleb's voice dropped into a dangerous calm. "And you believed him?" Winslow shrugged. "Man's got a claim, and you know how things are around here. Folks don't take kindly to people who look like her owning property while good men go without." George felt every word like a slap. The crowd gathering behind Winslow didn't bother hiding their smirks. Bitter Springs had always loved a spectacle, especially one involving her humiliation. Caleb tilted his head slightly, the only sign of the fury simmering beneath his skin. "Where is he?" Winslow jerked a thumb toward the saloon. "Inside. Says he'll hand over the deeds if she apologizes for stealing his birthright." "Birthright?" George whispered. "I've never met him. I didn't take anything from him." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Stay behind me." He pushed through the saloon doors with George close behind. The noise died instantly. Cards stilled. Glasses froze midair. All eyes turned. Jacob Sullivan sat at a corner table, thin, sharp-featured, eyes full of something twisted and hungry. He grinned when he saw George. "Well, look at you," he drawled. "Little Georgiana. Ain't so little. Pa always said you grow into a mountain." George flinched. Caleb didn't. "Hand over the deeds," Caleb said. Jacob leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "You her new keeper? I heard she needed one. Heard she couldn't walk 10 steps without wheezing." "That's enough," Caleb warned. "I said," Jacob repeated louder, "does she wheeze when she—" The table exploded upward as Caleb slammed Jacob against the wall, forearm pressing against his throat. The room erupted into gasps. "You open your mouth again," Caleb growled, "and I'll make sure you never use it." Jacob choked out a laugh. "Touch me, Stone, and the sheriff will bury you alive." "I've buried worse." The men at the table slowly pushed back their chairs. 6 of them, all watching, all itching for trouble. George's pulse pounded. "Caleb, please." He looked at her, not with anger, but with something raw, protective, relentless. Then he loosened his hold just enough for Jacob to breathe. "Give her what's hers." Jacob spat blood. "What's hers? She's nothing. Pa said so. Town says so. Only reason I came back is 'cause I knew she'd roll over if I pushed hard enough." Caleb's hand tightened. George stepped forward. "No." Her voice cut through the saloon like a blade. Caleb froze. Jacob smirked. The room stilled. George's knees shook, but her voice didn't. "I won't roll over, not this time, not ever again." She reached into Jacob's coat pocket, quick, decisive, and pulled out the folded deeds. He tried to grab her wrist, but Caleb slammed his hand against the wall. George lifted the papers, breath steady. "I don't want your land," she said. "I don't want your house. I don't want anything that belonged to the man who made my life hell. This is yours. If the sheriff wants to validate it, he can." She dropped the deeds on the table. "But my life," she said softly, "is not yours to touch." Jacob lunged, fury blazing, but Caleb punched him once, hard enough to fold him onto the floor unconscious. The room went deathly quiet. Caleb turned to George. "You ready to leave?" She nodded. They walked out side by side, leaving Jacob sprawled in the sawdust, the crowd parting like the sea for a man they knew better than to cross. Outside, night air hit her face, cool and sharp. George exhaled shakily, and Caleb laced his fingers through hers, not gently, not timidly, but firmly, as though claiming a truth neither of them could run from any more. "You did that," he murmured. "Not me. I was terrified." "You stood anyway," he said. "That's strength." George felt heat rise behind her eyes. "Where do we go now?" Caleb squeezed her hand. "Home." They left Bitter Springs behind without looking back. George didn't speak for the first miles, still feeling the tremor in her bones, not from fear, but from the shock of having stood up, of having been believed, of having had someone at her side who didn't shrink away when the world turned sharp. Caleb rode in silence beside her, his Appaloosa keeping an easy pace. He glanced at her every so often, quick checks, subtle, like a man trained to read danger in flickers. "You did good," he said finally. She didn't look at him. "I only said the truth." "Most folks never say it. Most folks let men like Jacob define their story." George swallowed. "I've let people do that my whole life." "Not today." The road narrowed into a canyon, moonlight catching in the crooked stone above them. When they reached the trail that wound toward Caleb's cabin, the air cooled and the scent of juniper lifted off the rocks like incense. They reached the clearing just as the moon rose high enough to silver the roof. Caleb dismounted first, then held out a hand to help her down. She didn't need the help, but she took it anyway. Inside, the cabin glowed softly with lamplight. Caleb lit the fire, stirring warmth into the room. The crackle of kindling filled the silence, the safe kind, the kind that made her shoulders loosen without permission. George sat at the small table, fingers tracing the carved rim of the cup he'd made her months ago. Caleb watched her for a long moment. "You're quiet." "Just tired." She hesitated, and relieved, and scared, I suppose. "Of Jacob?" "No, of—" She gestured vaguely. "All of this. My life is different now. Better, yes, but different. And I keep waiting for the world to take it away." Caleb crouched beside her chair, looking up at her with those cold, gray eyes that somehow warmed only when turned on her. "No one's taking you from here," he said. "Not your father, not Jacob, not that stage driver, not the whole damn town." "That's not what I'm afraid of," she whispered. He blinked slowly. "What then?" She met his gaze, steady. "You!" Caleb's breath hitched. Not a sound, not a gasp, just a shift in the air around him. A man who survived ambushes, gunfights, and winters that killed cattle outright suddenly looked unsure. "George," he said quietly, "I don't know how to be soft, or gentle, or easy. I can hunt, I can fight, I can protect. but I don't know how to give a woman the life she deserves." She reached out, rested her hand on his jaw. His eyes closed softly under the touch, as if it steadied him. "I don't want easy," she murmured. "I want real." He covered her hand with his, rough fingers curling over her knuckles, holding her like he wasn't sure he had the right. Like the moment might vanish if he breathed wrong. "This place," Caleb said, voice low, "this cabin, this fire, it's yours if you want it. You're safe here, safe with me." Her breath shook, tears rising unbidden. "Do you want me here?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, every damn day." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind curled around the cabin walls, but inside, the air was warm, thick with something fragile, something blooming. George wiped her eyes with the heel of her palm and laughed softly. "Caleb Stone, you are the least romantic man alive." He exhaled a sound that might have been a laugh. "Told you, I don't know how." "That's all right," she said. "I think I can learn enough for both of us." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, rough, unsure, tender, in the way only a man who had forgotten tenderness could be. "Then stay," he whispered. George looked around the small, warm cabin, at the firelight painting gold across the walls, at the man who had walked beside her through a past that once crushed her, at the future trembling like a held breath. "Let's see," she said softly, "if love is strong enough to survive the world outside these walls." And the fire crackled on, carrying her question into the night. Wherever you are in the world right now, listening on your phone, late at night, on a long drive, or curled up somewhere quiet, thank you for staying with George and Caleb until the end of their journey. Stories like theirs remind us that even the coldest hearts can thaw, and even the people the world mocks or overlooks can become the center of a love stronger than fear, cruelty, or the past. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Your comments breathe life into these stories, connecting us across miles and continents. And if you still believe in unlikely love, don't go far. The next story is waiting for you.